Hi everyone, welcome to Fang's Fable. Please remember to like and subscribe. Let's start the story. I'm a well-respected lecturer at my company. I charge $400 per class, and despite that, many parents pull strings just to get their kids into my lessons. But as soon as the boss's son, who had just returned from studying abroad, came back, he immediately targeted me. He wanted to cut my teaching fees. He even said, "Peter, you're just a hillbilly who's never been abroad. Why should you earn more than others?" Fine then, I might as well quit altogether. I resigned and took a break at home, but the students' parents weren't having it. They all clamored for refunds. "Peter, you might not know this, but the boss's son returned from studying abroad and said he's taking over the company." With a new leader in charge, things were bound to change, and I figured this wouldn't be a time to slack off. My colleague, Kevin, handed me a cup of coffee and started complaining. I took a sip and told him not to worry. Leadership changes were normal. As long as we filled up our classes and taught well, it didn't really matter who was in charge. Kevin sighed. "Of course, you're not worried. The parents sign up because of you. You're the company's star. Who would dare mess with you? But me? I'm just an average performer here. How can I not be nervous?" Seeing him rub his hands anxiously, I immediately understood why he treated me to coffee. "Don't worry," I reassured him. "I'll talk to Xavier and get him to schedule more classes for you." Hearing this, Kevin beamed. "Thanks, Peter. I've been overloaded with classes lately. My neck and head are killing me. I was thinking about taking a break and getting a massage." But before I could talk to Xavier about class scheduling, I received a notice for an urgent meeting. The boss's son had arrived earlier than expected. As I walked into the meeting room, I was surprised to see that the new boss was someone I knew, my high school classmate, Adrian. I was about to greet him, considering our past, but before I could call his name, he turned his head away as if he hadn't seen me. I immediately understood. This guy was pretending not to know me. So I retracted my outstretched hand and silently took my seat. Ben, our manager, looking obsequious, cleared his throat and announced, "This is our new director and boss, Mr. Liu. Everyone welcome him." Adrian wasted no time. "Let's talk about the class schedule for next quarter." He pointed his finger straight at me. "Peter Lee, you go first." Luckily, I was prepared. I had already planned the schedule and created a presentation. After I finished my report, my mouth was dry, so I took a sip of water and was about to sit down when Ben suddenly shouted, "Peter Lee, who told you to sit? Our director hasn't spoken yet, and you're already sitting down?" I looked up and saw Adrian glaring at me. I sighed. No point arguing with an idiot. I stood back up. "Mr. Liu, I'm done. Any questions?" Adrian tapped the table and said, "Peter, your class fees are quite high, aren't they?" Ah, so this was what he was after. I charged $400 per class. The company and I split the revenue 30-70, with the company taking 30% and me taking 70%, meaning I earned $280 per class. Other lecturers only charged $100 per class, and they split the fee 50-50 with the company, leaving them with just $50 per class. In fact, the company even deducted an extra $2 for administrative fees, so they only took home $48 per class. Compared to them, my pay was indeed much higher. But Adrian Liu didn't realize that many parents enrolled their children in our academy's courses precisely because of me. That's why my class fees were high. Every year, countless parents pull strings just to get their kids into my class. After all, as long as they attend my lessons, most of them see a rapid improvement in their English scores. Because of this, the company even made a rule. If you wanted to take my English class, you had to enroll in math and Chinese courses as well. Yet, Adrian sneered, "Peter, you only scored 148 on your National College Entrance Exam's English section. Why should you get such high teaching fees? From now on, you'll earn the same as everyone else, $48 per class." After the meeting, Kevin quietly asked me, "Peter, did you offend him somehow? Doesn't he know that you're the company's star? How does he dare treat you like this?" If we're talking about offending him, I wouldn't say I did. But back in high school, I was ranked first in the entire school for 3 years straight, while Kevin Liu was always last in our class. His grades weren't actually bad, but our class was an advanced placement class. and you had to rank in the top 40 in the entire grade to get in. He barely made it at number 40, which automatically made him last in our class. Adrian Liu had always been the type who loved to show off. He would flaunt his family's wealth and look down on other classmates, so he wasn't exactly popular. Every time he boasted, someone would counter him. Adrian, take a look at Peter Lee. He's ranked first in the whole school and scores nearly 100 points higher than you. Instead of bragging, why don't you spend more time studying like he does? Even someone as amazing as Peter doesn't act like you. Some classmates even gave him a nickname, the Eternal Last Place. Meanwhile, my nickname was the Eternal First. Since then, I had a feeling that Adrian Liu didn't like me. I thought after all these years, any grudges between us would have faded. But now it was clear he still held on to his resentment. Otherwise, he wouldn't have humiliated me on his very first day here. Before I could fully process what had just happened, Ben, the manager, called me into Liu's office, saying that the new boss had specifically requested to see me. Adrian was sitting in his office chair, drinking coffee. Out of habit, I reached for the chair across from him, intending to sit down. But before I could, Ben kicked me, nearly making me stumble. He was still the same bootlicker as always. "Director Liu didn't tell you to sit," he sneered, clearly enjoying this power play. So I just stood there, dumbfounded. At 1.85 meters tall, I was a full head taller than Adrian, and standing in front of him gave me an overwhelming sense of dominance. That clearly annoyed him, so he finally allowed me to sit. "Peter, long time no see. Bet you didn't expect this. I'm your boss now. Funny how life works, huh? One moment you're up, and the next, you're down. Don't you think so?" I had no interest in reminiscing about the past with him, so I replied indifferently, "Long time no see." He wasn't satisfied with my reaction. He lit a cigar, took a puff, and blew the smoke right into my face. "Back in school, you were better than me at everything," he said smugly. "But so what? No matter how good your grades were, you still ended up working for me, didn't you? Some people, like me, are born ahead of the game. And some people, no matter how hard they try, will never catch up. Don't you agree, Peter?" He was obviously gloating. Since I didn't respond, he continued, "Peter, I looked into your records. You've been with the company for 3 years now. Every year, you've made more in teaching fees than anyone else. I've already informed the finance department. Starting today, you won't receive a salary for a year. Consider it repayment for all the extra money you've earned in the past. But the company is fair. Just work hard, and after repaying your dues, you can still continue working here and get your pay. Continue working under me for another 20 years. You might even be able to buy a house." Adrian replied in an almost sniggering fashion. He laughed and patted my shoulder while standing up, his eyes filled with undisguised contempt. A whole year without pay? He really had the audacity to say that. I swallowed my anger and asked, "No room for negotiation?" Kevin slammed his hand on the table. His voice echoed with arrogance. "My dad handed this company over to me. I call the shots here." So that was that. There was no room for discussion. I walked out of Adrian's office in a daze, my mind racing, thinking to myself, should I even continue working here? By the time I snapped out of my thoughts, it was already the end of the workday. It was Monday, and I had no classes. I exhaled, deciding to go watch a movie to relax before making a final decision about quitting. Just as I grabbed my bag and was about to clock out, I ran into both of them coming out of the meeting room. Kevin shot me a look of disgust. Ben immediately picked up on it and barked at me. "Peter, what are you doing?" I frowned and pointed at the clock. "It's the end of my shift. You're in such a hurry to leave right at the stroke of the hour?" he scoffed. "Look around. Everyone else is staying late to prepare lessons. You have no work ethic at all." He spat his words at me, literally. His saliva sprayed onto my face. Meanwhile, Adrian nodded in satisfaction. "Peter Lee," he said, "if you work for me, you better follow my orders. How about this? You stay for 3 more hours and clock out at 8 p.m. I looked around at my colleagues. They all kept their heads down, pretending to be busy. Some had originally planned to leave, but now hesitated, opening their laptops instead. I shook my head. "Boss, I've finished my work. It's the end of my shift. There's nothing wrong with leaving on time. Yesterday was Sunday. I had taught all day. Today, I had planned to take a well-deserved break. Instead, I spent the entire afternoon in a pointless meeting. Now, I just wanted to go home. Besides, I had already made plans to see a movie with a friend, and time was running out. Adrian Liu looked displeased. Peter, the economy isn't doing well right now. Don't say I didn't warn you. Finding a job these days isn't easy. Oh? Was he threatening me? I absolutely hate being threatened. If you talk to me properly, I might still give you some respect. Just as I was about to retort, my phone rang. It was Adrian's father. Peter, just a heads up that my son, Adrian, has taken over the company now. He's still green, so I need you to guide and support him. I have intended to tell him about the situation and ask if he knew that Adrian had cut my teaching fees. But before I could say a word, he interrupted me. Peter, no matter what my son does, all of you senior employees need to cooperate. From now on, the company is under his control. I'm old. I won't be managing these things anymore. I agreed silently and hung up the phone. In the end, I never got to watch that movie. I was forced to work overtime for 3 extra hours, and by the time I left, it was already 8 p.m. My neck was stiff and my stomach was still growling. I went out onto the balcony, lit a cigarette, and started pondering about everything. With my degree, I could have made a name for myself in a big city and secured a well-paying job. But the year I graduated from my master's program, my mom suddenly fell ill. The doctor said she needed constant care, so I had no choice but to return to my hometown and find a job nearby to take care of her. Being a lecturer was flexible. I could work from home. That's how I ended up staying in this job for 3 years. In those 3 years, I worked diligently, never taking a single day off. I even built myself a strong reputation in the education industry. I had saved enough money to buy a house, and my original plan for this year was to take on more classes to save up for renovations. But now, Adrian had suddenly decided to withhold my entire year's salary, putting a huge dent in my plan. I spent the whole night thinking about whether I should just tender my resignation. After all, when I was unemployed, it was Adrian's father, Senior Liu, who extended a helping hand, brought me into the company, and even allowed me to work flexible hours so I could care for my mother. To be fair, I owed him a debt of gratitude. I didn't want to be ungrateful. But before I could even make up my mind, Adrian made the decision for me. He fired me outright. The next day, when I arrived at work, my desk was piled high with random junk. I turned to Kevin and mouthed, "What's going on with my desk?" He looked puzzled. "Ben told the janitor to put all this stuff here. I thought they had moved you to another desk." So it was another one of Kevin's tricks. I marched straight into his office. "Kevin, what's going on with my desk?" My tone was loud and brash. Inside, both of them were staring at a computer screen with lecherous expressions. When I walked in, Ben jumped up with fright. "Peter Lee, why didn't you knock?" "I did. You two were just too absorbed in whatever you were watching." Adrian snapped his laptop shut and sneered. "Peter, you're fired. Get out." "What?" My mind went blank for a second. "You're firing me? Why?" Honestly, I couldn't understand why he would even consider firing me. After all, most of the Academy's revenue was generated by me. He seems vaguely unaware of this. Adrian let out a cold snort. "You violated company policy. Our policy states that lecturers are not allowed to contact parents privately. Look at what you've done." He pointed out a pile of papers and threw a stack of screenshots in front of me. There were chat logs between me and parents, messages where students had asked me for help with their homework, and I had provided explanations. You privately contacted parents and tutored students outside of work hours. I have reason to suspect that you've been taking private tutoring clients behind the company's back. At that moment, I realized something. When you're so speechless that words fail you, all you can do is laugh. I had never turned off my phone since becoming the Academy's lecturer. I kept it on 24/7 so parents could contact me anytime. If a student had some questions or trouble with their studies, I would always be available to help with a text away. This was exactly why the students' parents trusted me. Even Adrian's father knew this. Back when he was in charge, he had even praised my dedication, using me as an example to encourage other employees to follow my work ethic. And now, he was using this as an excuse to fire me? I couldn't help but laugh. Did he even realize what consequences he was bringing upon himself? Back then, to entice parents to purchase more class hours, the academy assured them that I would always be responsible for tutoring their children and that I would never be replaced midway. To put parents at ease, the company even wrote into the contract that if I were replaced, they would have to refund double the class fees. Because of this contract, parents felt secure in purchasing lesson packages. Some even bought 5 years' worth in one go. Furthermore, the company's math and Chinese courses were bundled with my English courses. In other words, if I were fired, the company wouldn't just have to refund double the English class fees, but also the fees for math and Chinese. I wasn't sure if the company would even survive after paying such a massive compensation. As far as I knew, due to the poor economic climate, all of Adrian Liu's father's other businesses had already collapsed. This tutoring academy was the only one still running. I looked at Adrian and asked him one last time, "Are you sure you want to terminate me?" "Yes," he sneered. "Peter, why are you clinging on like a mangy dog? I told you to get lost. Don't you understand?" Ben chimed in, "Yeah, get lost already, you mangy dog." "All right, very well." Since they were digging their own graves, I saw no reason to stop them. I walked straight into the HR office to complete my resignation procedures. By law, the company was supposed to compensate me for my dismissal, but the HR staff pointed toward Adrian's office and sighed. "He won't approve your compensation. He says you violated company policy, so your termination follows normal procedures." I didn't argue with HR. I simply followed the process to finalize my resignation. After all, my base salary wasn't much. Most of my earnings came from class fees. After completing the handover, I made sure to get an official document and watched as Adrian signed it. From that moment on, his company had nothing to do with me. I glanced at my savings. Over the past 3 years, I had accumulated quite a bit, almost 900,000. Not a fortune, but not a small amount either. For 3 years, I had worked tirelessly, never taking a single holiday. Now, I finally had the chance to relax. Besides, after years of medical treatment, my mother's health had gradually improved. When I was a child, I had promised her that I would take her to see the world. Now, it was time to fulfill that promise. I opened a travel website and booked plane tickets to Yunnan. I had to admit, the air in Yunnan was incredible: lush mountains, clear waters, and a slow-paced lifestyle. My mother and I checked into a cozy guest house, ready to explore every scenic spot. I had already predicted that the moment I left, Adrian's Liu company would run into trouble. The next morning, I received a call from a parent. She had been with me for 3 years and had introduced many other parents to the academy. The moment she heard I had been fired, she was stunned. "What? The boss actually dared to fire you? Is he out of his mind? He signed contracts with all of us. If they replace you, they have to refund our fees. He's literally throwing away his golden goose." In this day and age, you don't find idiots like him anymore. After cursing Adrian for a while, she asked, "Mr. Li, can you continue teaching my daughter?" "My daughter only trusts you. Wherever you go, we'll follow." "Oh, right. I bet all the students I introduced will follow you too." Then, she suddenly slapped her thigh and said, "Mr. Li, why don't you start your own tutoring center? If you do, I guarantee I can bring at least 50 students with me." She chimed enthusiastically. I smiled to myself and started seriously considering the idea. I hung up the phone with her shortly and told her I would sleep on it. My mother, who had been listening beside me, sighed. "It's all because of my illness that you got held back. Now that I'm better, if you want to chase your dreams, you should go for it while you're still young. Don't worry about me." She had always felt guilty, thinking that she had been a burden to me, that because of her, I couldn't stay in any of the big capital cities to build a successful career. This had been a lingering regret in her heart. I picked up a shawl and draped it over her shoulders. "Mom, I've never had big ambitions. From childhood to now, I've worked so hard just so you could have a good life. As long as you're healthy and by my side, I'm already content." Back then, after my dad cheated, it was my mom who endured immense hardship, working 2 jobs just to put me through school. In this life, the most important person to me is my mom. Hearing my words, my mom wiped away her tears and nodded. Before I could even figure out my next steps, Ben called me. Over the phone, he still acted high and mighty. Peter Lee, after our investigation, we found that your communication with parents was determined to be normal and you didn't privately collect lesson fees. So given the tough job market and considering that you've worked at the company for years, we've decided to let this slide. You can come back and continue teaching. However, your class fee, well, it needs to be reduced again. How about $20 per lesson? 20. Lowering my lesson fee from $400 per class to $20 per class? Even slaves didn't suffer this much. Not happening. Ben, you don't need to worry about me. I won't starve to death. Ben refused to give up. Are you really not coming back? You won't get another opportunity like this. Does this guy not understand basic human speech? I couldn't be bothered to argue and just hung up the phone. Ben kept calling back several times, but I declined all his calls. During this time, I also called Kevin to ask about the company's situation. As soon as he picked up, he couldn't hold back his frustration and started complaining. Peter, you made the right choice leaving. Adrian is a complete idiot. It turned out that as soon as I left, the parents noticed something was wrong and started asking where I was. When they found out I was no longer teaching, the colleague in charge of handling this matter honestly told them that I had been fired. No one expected the parents to explode with anger instantly. Who wouldn't be furious? Especially those who had prepaid for 2, 3, or even 5 years of lessons. They immediately pulled out their contracts and demanded double refunds. The staff couldn't handle the situation and had to escalate it to Ben, the manager. With no other choice, Ben came forward to control the chaos. He pushed out the other English teachers and assured the parents that the new teacher had higher qualifications and more experience, guaranteeing they would teach even better than me. Ben even pounded his chest in confidence, saying, "If the new teacher isn't good, we'll refund you all." Kevin laughed as he told me, "Peter, you should have seen it. The moment the new English teacher saw the huge crowd, their legs went weak. He didn't even start the class, just made up an excuse, ran to the bathroom, and never came back. Haha." Honestly, this was expected. Who could handle that kind of pressure on their very first class? When the parents realized there wasn't even an English teacher left, they rushed to the front desk, almost tearing it apart. In the end, Ben had no choice but to call in Adrian. Adrian tried to calm the parents down. "Everyone, we are all here for the sake of improving your children's academic performance, not just for refunds. How about this? I, as the boss, personally guarantee that within 1 week we will find a better English teacher." But the parents weren't having it. And what if the new teacher isn't good? Yeah, the new teacher today ran away the moment class was about to start. We want Mr. Peter Lie. Seeing that things were going south, Adrian had no choice but to grit his teeth and promise, "If the new teacher isn't satisfactory, I will personally invite Mr. Lee back to continue teaching." How about that? While some parents were tempted to demand refunds, their children's education was still the priority. Otherwise, they wouldn't have paid such high fees to enroll them in my class in the first place. Reluctantly, the parents agreed to give him 1 week to solve the issue. Before leaving, one parent, who had a good relationship with me, gave Adrian a once-over from head to toe and scoffed, "You actually look normal, so why is your brain functioning like it isn't? You had a good money-making machine like Peter Lee, and you forced him out? Are you dumb? My kid has had plenty of teachers, but none as responsible as Teacher Lee, and you fired him? Seriously?" Tsk, tsk, tsk. Apparently, Adrian was so enraged that his entire face twisted, but he didn't dare to lash out. He was terrified that if he provoked the parents further, they would force him to pay all the refunds immediately. So, he had no choice but to endure it, forcing out a stiff smile. Adrian and Ben thought that as long as they asked nicely, I would obediently go back to work for them. But they seriously miscalculated. As soon as news of my dismissal spread, several companies immediately reached out to offer me job opportunities. They all promised that if I joined them, they would negotiate my lesson fees favorably. One company even offered me 90% of the lesson fees. Meanwhile, Adrian was still complaining. After getting scolded by the parents, Adrian took his frustration out on us. He blamed us, saying that the parents were demanding refunds because our teaching wasn't good enough. He's now forcing us to prepare lessons for an additional 3 hours every day. We've been working overtime for days, and he even forbade anyone from taking time off. Yesterday, Wang caught a bad cold and tried to request leave, but Adrian flat out refused. Wang had no choice but to push through. In the end, he collapsed in the office and had to be sent to the hospital. The doctor said it was due to overwork and exhaustion. This job is literally killing us. Kevin's voice dropped. Peter, to be honest, a lot of us can't take it anymore and are thinking about quitting. I don't think I can last much longer either. But I still have a mortgage to pay. Man, I'm really stressed out. Just as I hung up with Kevin, my phone vibrated incessantly. It was Adrian. This time, his tone was much nicer. Peter, Ben must have told you already, right? We're willing to let you come back and teach again. After reconsidering, we won't deduct your lesson fees. You'll still get $400 per lesson like before. Come back to work tomorrow. Huh? Adrian, I've already told Ben I have nothing to do with your company anymore. I'm not coming back. Adrian's voice turned cold. Peter, think carefully. We're offering to let you return because of the contributions you made to the company in the past. But don't forget, our industry is a small circle. What do you think would happen if I spread the word that you were secretly contacting parents outside of work? Would any company still hire you? Oh, so now he's trying to threaten me? Adrian, didn't your small circle friends tell you? I've already received several job offers. The other end of the call went silent for a few seconds. Peter, don't think you can fool me with some made-up lie. I'm giving you one last chance. Report to work tomorrow. Screw you. Are you deaf? I said I'm not coming back. Get lost, you idiot. I hung up immediately and blocked both Adrian and Ben's numbers. The world suddenly felt so much more peaceful. I continued enjoying my vacation with my mom, eating and sightseeing at a leisurely pace. It was the most relaxing weekend ever. But while I was having a great time, someone else definitely wasn't. Kevin, my ex-colleague, called me again. He told me that after a week passed, and since I still didn't return, Adrian tried to hire a well-known English teacher at a high price to cover the classes. However, the moment the teacher heard that they would have to refund the parents if his teaching wasn't up to standard, he refused immediately. Not a single one was willing to take the job. Left with no choice, Adrian decided to teach the class himself. He internalized, "Since I studied abroad, I must be better than Peter at teaching." Big mistake. If he had just stayed out of it, it wouldn't have been so bad. But the moment he stepped into the classroom, disaster struck. Every 5 minutes, students would ask him questions. And guess what? He couldn't answer a single one. He even pulled out his phone to Google the answers. The parents completely lost it. Right then and there, they demanded double refunds. No matter what excuses he gave, the parents refused to budge. One parent went off on him. "You have no knowledge and skills at all, and yet you dare to teach our kids? You're just wasting our time. You can't even answer a simple question, and you still claim to be better than Mr. Lee? What a joke." Another one chimed in. "If you don't refund us, we'll take you to court. Either bring back Mr. Lee or give us our money back." Refund, refund, refund. But where the hell was he going to get that much money? He had already squandered all the parents' lesson fees. He couldn't even pay back the original amount, let alone double the refunds. Then someone filmed the entire scene and uploaded it online. For the next 2 days, I kept seeing videos of angry parents blocking the company's entrance on my social media feed, chasing Adrian down for refunds. The incident even trended locally on social media. In the videos, Adrian Liu was running for his life, looking completely pathetic. Someone even threw a rotten egg at his head. It was absolutely hilarious. Meanwhile, I happily finished my vacation and returned home. But the moment I reached my doorstep, I saw Adrian's father, old Mr. Liu, standing there, and next to him, a very miserable-looking Adrian. The moment old Mr. Liu saw me, he enthusiastically came forward to greet me, as if there had never been any happenings between me and his son. "Peter Lee, why don't you welcome me?" I was momentarily stunned, but still let them into my house. Old Mr. Marr, Liu sighed and lightly patted Adrian on the forehead. "Dad, what are you doing?" Adrian gave a look of agitation. Old Mr. Liu's face immediately darkened. "You brat, how dare you talk back to me?" Then he turned back to me with a smile. Xiaoli, my son is useless. I heard that he offended you, and I was furious when I found out. How about this? Can you just let this go for my sake? If Lu Sr. had spoken to me like this from the beginning, I might have agreed. But it had already been several weeks, and I refused to believe that old Mr. Lu was completely unaware of what his son had done. He had simply turned a blind eye to it. After all this time, I had figured it out. Old Mr. Lu probably never thought I was worth that much in lesson fees, which is why he let his son lower my pay and even fire me. I shook my head. Sorry, boss. I've made up my mind. I'm not coming back. The smile on Senior Lu's face froze. Xiaoli, can't you give me just one chance? I was the one who helped you rise to where you are today, I chuckled. Boss, I spent 3 years growing this company alongside you. I had a sentimental attachment to it. That's why, even when many other companies tried to poach me with higher salaries, I never wavered or thought about leaving. Old Mr. Lu's smile softened and he nodded. Xiaoli, you're a good man. But I continued, changing my tone. Boss, but over the past 2 years, the company's culture has deteriorated. The ones getting promoted are just bootlickers like Manager Ben. I gave you multiple warnings, and each time you promised to look into it, only to forget the moment you turned around. Many excellent teachers have resigned on their own, and now you've even let someone like Adrian, who knows nothing about management, take over your position. Senior Lu panicked. Xiaoli, I understand now. I will discipline my son and clean up the company. How about this? You take over as manager. I shook my head. Boss, even you thought I wasn't worth that much in lesson fees, right? Senior Lu frantically waved his hands. No, how could I ever think that? I smiled. Boss, Ben reports to you every single day. I overheard him talking to you about firing me in the stairwell that day. Old Mr. Lu froze in place. He had nothing left to say. In the end, he left in disgrace, dragging his disappointment of a son along with him. 1 month later, Adrian Liu's company went bankrupt. Meanwhile, I had started my own. On the opening day, parents flooded the entrance, eager to enroll their children. One parent, who was especially close to me, immediately signed up for 5 years' worth of lessons. She brought along dozens of other parents, who all signed up on the spot. She raised her voice excitedly. Mr. Li, you're finally back. My daughter said she only wants you to teach her. No one else explains things as clearly as you. We're sticking with you. Other parents chimed in. Exactly, Mr. Li. After experiencing other teachers, we truly appreciate your skill. And your opening discount, only 50 per lesson, is even cheaper than before. I'm signing up for more. Me too. I want a 5-year lesson package. Even random passersby, seeing the excitement, signed up without hesitation. A sales staff member was so shocked that they asked, "Why do you trust Mr. Li so much?" One parent laughed and said, "Look at all these people. If so many parents believe in him, he must be good." By the end of opening day, I had already made back all my initial investment. I even hired Kevin and some of my former colleagues. Kevin was grinning from ear to ear. Peter, I'm sticking with you from now on. I thought after the old academy went bankrupt, we'd all be starving, but now our salaries are higher than ever, and the benefits are even better. A few days later, I heard from a friend that ever since the company's bankruptcy, Adrian had lost all sources of income. But he had already developed a habit of reckless spending. The wealthy second-generation kids he used to hang out with mocked him for being broke. Unable to bear the humiliation, he sold his car and house. But since both were second-hand and he was desperate for cash, he had to sell them at a loss. If he had used that money wisely, he could have at least lived a modest life. But his so-called friends set him up, leading him into gambling. At first, they let him win $50,000, making him think he had good luck. But soon, he kept raising his bets. In the end, he not only lost all his money, but also fell into $300,000 of debt to loan sharks. When he couldn't repay, the loan sharks came knocking on his door. His father, upon learning how much he owed, suffered a stroke and collapsed. If they had rushed him to the hospital, he might have survived. But Adrian, being such a heartless son, not wanting to waste money treating his father, told him this. Dad, just let go. His father stared at him in shock, unable to say a word. And then, he died. Even after death, his eyes refused to close. People whispered that he had died with regrets. Meanwhile, Adrian, unable to repay his debt, spent his days hiding and running, afraid of the loan sharks. The last time someone saw him, he was digging through a garbage bin with a group of beggars. And that's the end of today's story. Thanks for listening.